The old woman knew she was dying, and she had exactly one thing left to do before the winter took her. Nobody in the palace suspected. They still saw Princess Regent Adelheid of Verinhold as they always had, straight-backed at 71, riding out at dawn in weather that sent younger courtiers scurrying for their furs, her voice sharp enough to silence a council chamber with a single word. What they did not see was the small brown bottle she kept locked in the drawer of her writing desk, or the way her hands had begun to tremble when she thought no one was watching. The physician had given her until the first heavy snow, perhaps a little longer if she rested. She had no intention of resting. There was a young woman she had been watching for 11 years, a woman the entire court had dismissed as pleasant and unremarkable, and before Adelheid closed her eyes for the last time, she meant to place the future of an entire kingdom into that woman's steady, underestimated hands. The question that kept her awake through the long, cold nights was not whether she would succeed. It was whether anyone would let her. The kingdom of Verinhold sat in a bowl of gray mountains at the northern edge of the known maps, a place of long winters, short bright summers, and a people who valued endurance above nearly everything else. For 4 generations it had been ruled not by a king or queen, but by a regent, an old and peculiar arrangement born from a war none of the living could remember, in which the crown itself had been locked away, and the right to govern passed instead through a ceremony called the naming. Whoever held the regency chose their own successor. There was no bloodline requirement, no council vote, no rule of inheritance. The tradition held that the ruler alone in the last season of their life would name the person best suited to carry the burden, and that this choice, made freely, made in the open, made without ambition clouding it, produced better rulers than any accident of birth. It was a strange system, and a fragile one, and it had held Verinhold together for 140 years. Adelheid had been named at the age of 34 by a regent everyone assumed would choose his own nephew. The kingdom had nearly torn itself apart over it. She had spent the first decade of her rule proving the old man right, and the 3 decades after that making it impossible for anyone to remember there had ever been doubt. Now the choice was hers to make, and she found that it weighed more than she had ever imagined it would when she was young and certain, and standing where the young woman stood now. The young woman's name was Catherine Merrow, and she was not, by any measure the court respected, remarkable. She had come to the palace at 19 as a junior clerk in the household accounts, the daughter of a provincial road engineer and a schoolmistress, with no title, no fortune, and no family connection that could open a single door. She had risen since then, but slowly, and into positions no one envied: mistress of the winter stores, overseer of the palace infirmary, keeper of the correspondence between the regency and the mountain villages that the great lords considered beneath their notice. She was 30 now. She was neither beautiful in the way the court prized nor plain enough to be pitied. She spoke little in large rooms and a great deal in small ones. When the nobles thought of her at all, which was rarely, they thought of her as useful, in the way a well-made tool is useful, and they did not think of her as a person who might one day give them orders. Adelheid thought of her constantly. It had started 11 years earlier in a bad winter, when a fever swept through the lower town, and the palace physicians locked the gates to keep the sickness out. It was Catherine, then barely 20, who had quietly organized the delivery of grain and medicine to the quarantine districts, forging the regent's seal to release supplies, because there was no time to ask permission and every hour cost lives. When the crisis passed and the forgery was discovered, the steward had demanded she be dismissed and flogged. Adelheid had summoned the girl to her private study, expecting to find her trembling. She had not been trembling. "You broke the law and used my name to do it," Adelheid had said. "Yes," the girl had answered. 340 people would have died. I decided they mattered more than the law. I still think I was right. If you disagree, I understand, and I'll accept whatever you decide. But I won't tell you I'm sorry for a thing I'd do again." Adelheid had studied her for a long moment, this thin, tired, ordinary-looking girl who had just admitted to a crime and refused to grovel for it. And something in the old regent had gone very still and very attentive, the way a hunter goes still at the first true sign of what she has been tracking for years. She had not flogged her. She had not dismissed her. She had promoted her to a post just important enough to keep her close and just obscure enough that no one would wonder why. And then she had begun, quietly and patiently, and without ever once telling the girl what she was doing, to watch. She watched Catherine handle men who tried to cheat her, and never once let her temper decide the outcome. She watched her be passed over for promotions she had earned, and absorb the insult, and go on doing the work well anyway, because the work mattered more to her than the credit. She watched her sit with dying soldiers in the infirmary because no one else would, and write letters to their mothers in her own hand. She watched her be wrong, occasionally, and admit it without excuses, which Adelheid had learned across a long life was rarer and more valuable than being right. She watched her refuse a bribe that would have made her wealthy, not with outrage, but with a kind of puzzled disinterest, as though the man offering it had simply misunderstood what she was for. 11 years. And in 11 years Catherine Merrow had never once done the thing that Adelheid was truly watching for, never once, when she thought no one important was looking, revealed a smaller and meaner self than the one she showed the world. There was no second Catherine hiding behind the first. What you saw was what she was, all the way down. The regent had made her decision 2 winters ago. She had told no one. Now the snow was coming, and there was no more time to be careful. The morning she began was gray and bitter, the light coming thin through the tall windows of her study. Adelheid sat at her writing desk with the brown bottle unlocked in the drawer and a single sheet of paper in front of her, and she wrote out, in her own steady hand, the first of the letters that would set everything in motion. Then she rang for her steward, a lean and anxious man named Corvin who had served her for 20 years and believed, as most of the court believed, that he understood her mind. "I want to see the household accounts for the mountain districts," she said. "Bring Mistress Merrow to explain them, this afternoon." Corvin blinked. "The accounts are in perfect order, Highness. I reviewed them myself. There's no need to trouble." "I didn't ask whether there was a need. I said bring her." He went. Adelheid sat alone in the gray light and pressed her trembling hand flat against the desk until it stilled, and she thought, not for the first time, about how the hardest part of what was coming would not be the dying. The hardest part would be the fight, because the moment she spoke Catherine's name aloud, half the most powerful people in Verinhold would decide that an ordinary clerk's daughter must not be allowed to rule them, and they would do everything short of open treason to stop it. Some of them, she suspected, would not stop short of open treason at all. Chief among them would be her own nephew. Lord Rennick was 44 years old, handsome in a heavy way, and had spent his entire adult life operating under the comfortable assumption that when his aunt finally died, the regency would come to him. He was not a stupid man. He was charming when it served him, generous with those who could be useful, and genuinely competent at the parts of governing that involved being seen to govern. He commanded the loyalty of perhaps a third of the great lords through a careful web of marriages, debts, and favors, and he had spent years positioning himself as the obvious and natural choice, the strong hand, the known quantity, the man who looked the way a ruler was supposed to look. He had never once in all those years considered that his aunt might be watching someone else. Why would she? He was blood. He was ready. He was owed. Adelheid loved him in the complicated way one loves family, and she knew with total clarity that he must never be allowed to rule. It was not that Rennick was cruel. It was that Rennick, underneath the charm, cared about exactly one thing, and that thing was Rennick. He would govern Verinhold competently and comfortably and entirely for his own benefit, and the mountain villages would go on being invisible to him, and the 340 people who would have died in a forgotten winter would have died, because Rennick would never once have thought of them at all. He would be a perfectly acceptable regent, and he would be exactly the wrong one. That afternoon, Catherine Merrow came to the study with the account books under her arm, and stood, and answered questions about grain deliveries and road repairs with the quiet competence of someone who had never imagined the questions were about anything but grain and roads. Adelheid asked her about a discrepancy in the winter stores. Catherine explained it. Adelheid asked her about a village that had petitioned 3 times for a bridge and been refused 3 times. Catherine's jaw tightened, very slightly, and she said that the refusals had come from the Treasury, not from her, and that in her opinion the Treasury was wrong, and that a child had drowned at that crossing last spring and would not be the last. "You disagree with the Treasury," Adelheid said mildly. "You asked me a question, Highness. I answered it honestly. If you prefer I lie to you, I'll need to know that in advance so I can be consistent about it." And there it was again, that flat, unafraid honesty, offered to the most powerful woman in the kingdom by a clerk who could be dismissed with a word. Adelheid felt the thing in her chest that she had felt 11 years ago in this same room, and she knew, past all doubt, that she had chosen correctly. "That bridge will be built before the spring," she said. "See to it, use my seal, openly this time." Catherine went very still. "Highness." "You heard me." The young woman looked at her for a long moment, and something passed behind her steady eyes. Not gratitude exactly, but a kind of careful attention, as though she had just noticed that the ground beneath a familiar room had shifted in a way she did not yet understand. "Thank you," Catherine said finally. "The village will be glad of it." And then, because she was who she was, "May I ask why now after 3 refusals?" "No," said Adelheid, "you may not yet." When the young woman had gone, the regent sat alone as the gray light failed, and she allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel the full weight of what she was about to do. She was going to take the most ordinary person in her kingdom and lift her over the heads of the proudest and most dangerous, and she was going to do it while dying, with no time to smooth the way, and she was going to leave Catherine to survive the storm that followed with only whatever strength the girl carried in her own 2 hands. It was a terrible thing to do to someone. It might get her killed. And it was, Adelheid knew with the bone-deep certainty of a woman who had governed for 37 years, the single most important act of her entire life. Outside the tall windows, the first snow of winter began to fall. She had perhaps 2 months. She would need every day. That evening she wrote 3 more letters, one to the keeper of the old ceremonies, one to the commander of the palace guard, and one sealed letter she addressed to no one and locked in the drawer beside the brown bottle, to be opened only if she died before the nomming could be done. Then she rang for Corvin a final time and told him to summon the full council in 1 week's time, every great lord in the kingdom, on a matter of succession. The steward's face went carefully blank. "Succession, Highness. Might I tell Lord Rennick the nature of the—" "You may tell Lord Rennick," said Adelheid, "that I will see him at the council with everyone else. And Corvin, I know you carry news to my nephew. I've always known. I don't blame you. A man must have a future, and mine is nearly spent. But hear me clearly. Whatever you think you know about what I'm going to do, you know nothing. Carry that to him if you like." Corvin left white-faced. Adelheid returned to the window and watched the snow thicken over the courtyard, over the gray mountains, over the sleeping kingdom that did not yet know its whole future was about to change. Somewhere below her in the palace, a clerk's daughter was arranging for a bridge to be built so that no more children would drown, and had no idea that within a week she would be the most hated and most important woman in Verinhold. Let them hate her, Adelheid thought. Hate passes, what she'll build will last. She closed the drawer on the brown bottle and the sealed letter, and she began, in her mind, to prepare for the fight of her life, the last one, and the only one that had ever truly mattered. The council chamber of Verinhold had not been this full in 20 years, and every soul in it knew that something was about to break. They came through the snow from every corner of the kingdom, the great lords in their heavy furs, the mountain barons who rarely left their holdings, the merchant princes of the river towns, the old families whose names went back to the founding war. They filled the long chamber with its blackened beams and its single high window, and they filled it with noise, the low, urgent murmur of 100 powerful people all asking the same question and none of them knowing the answer. Succession. The old regent had summoned them on a matter of succession, and every one of them had spent the week since the summons doing the arithmetic of their own advantage. Adelheid was 71. She had never named a successor. If she meant to do it now, then the balance of the entire kingdom was about to shift, and a person who guessed the direction of that shift early could ride it to unimaginable heights, and a person who guessed wrong could lose everything. So they came, and they watched each other, and they waited. Lord Rennick arrived last, as a man arrives who believes the room cannot properly begin until he is in it. He wore deep blue and silver, and he moved through the crowd with the easy warmth of a man greeting his future subjects, clasping hands, remembering names, laughing at the small jokes of lords he privately despised. He had spent the week in a state of controlled exhilaration. The summons could mean only one thing. His aunt at last was doing the sensible thing. She was going to name him publicly before the whole council, so that there could be no dispute when the winter finally took her. He had even in the privacy of his own rooms begun to draft the speech he would give in reply, gracious, humble, strong. He took his seat near the front, folded his hands, and composed his face into an expression of dignified surprise, ready to receive what he had waited his entire life to be given. Catherine Merrow stood at the very back of the chamber, near the servants' door, and had no idea why she was there at all. She had received the summons that morning, a plain card in the regent's own hand, instructing her to attend the council and to speak to no one about it. She had assumed it meant work, some question about the mountain accounts perhaps, or the bridge, which she had set in motion 3 days ago and which had already caused a small storm in the treasury. She had worn her good gray dress, the one without patches, and she had come and found a place at the back where she would not be in anyone's way, and she had watched the great lords fill the room with a growing sense of unease she could not name. This was not a room for account books. Something else was happening here. She did not know what, and every instinct she had told her that she did not want to be standing in the middle of it when it arrived. Then the great doors at the front opened, and the Princess Regent Adelheid of Verinhold walked into the chamber, and the room fell silent as a stone. She had dressed for it. That was the first thing Catherine noticed. The old woman wore the full regalia of the regency, the deep black and gold, the chain of office that Catherine had seen perhaps twice in 11 years, the heavy ceremonial ring. She walked without a stick, her back straight, her chin level, and only Catherine, who had spent 11 years learning to read people that no one else bothered to look at, saw the enormous effort it cost her, saw the faint unsteadiness in the first step, the way one hand brushed the table as though by accident but was in truth taking her weight for half a heartbeat. The regent was ill. Catherine understood it in an instant, with a cold drop of certainty in her stomach. The regent was very ill, and had dressed in her full power to hide it, and had summoned the entire kingdom to witness whatever she was about to do while she still had the strength to do it. Adelheid reached the great chair at the head of the chamber and did not sit. She stood before it. And she let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable, until every eye in the room was fixed on her and every breath was held. And then she spoke, and her voice filled the chamber with the old iron that had governed them for 37 years. "You all know why you are here," she said. "You have known for a week, and you have spent that week guessing. I will not make you guess any longer. I am dying." The chamber made a sound, a single, involuntary intake of breath from 100 throats at once. Rennick's composed face flickered. This he had not expected her to say so plainly. "The physicians give me until the deep snow," Adelheid went on, unhurried, as though she were discussing the grain stores. "Perhaps a few weeks past it. I have ruled this kingdom for 37 years, and by the law and custom of Verinhold, before I die, I must do the one thing that the regency demands of every regent. I must name the person who will rule after me. I have summoned you here to witness it, so that when I am gone there can be no doubt, no dispute, and no pretender able to claim that the thing was done in shadow. It will be done in the light, before all of you. Now." Rennick shifted in his seat, and Catherine, watching from the back, saw him prepare, saw him draw a slow breath, saw one hand move unconsciously to smooth the silver at his collar, saw the small, confident settling of a man who believes his name is the next word that will be spoken. She felt a distant flicker of something almost like sympathy for whoever was about to be disappointed, though she did not yet understand that the person about to be disappointed was him, and she did not remotely understand that the person about to be named was her. "For 140 years," said Adelheid, "the regents of Verinhold have chosen their successors by a single principle: not blood, not wealth, not the favor of powerful men. The principle is this, that the person best fit to hold power is very often the person who has never sought it, and that the surest measure of a soul is not how it behaves when the whole world is watching, but how it behaves when it believes no one of importance is watching at all. I have spent my life ruling by that principle. I will die by it. And I have spent the last 11 years of my life watching one person in this kingdom who has never once in all that time failed that measure, not when it cost her, not when she was passed over, not when she was insulted, not when doing right earned her nothing and doing wrong would have earned her a great deal." A murmur was building now, low and confused. 11 years. She had watched someone for 11 years. The lords looked at one another. Who had the old woman been watching? Rennick's confident expression had gone slightly rigid at the edges, because this was not how he had imagined it. This talk of clerks and insults and people who were passed over. This was not the language a regent used to describe her own noble nephew, and a first thin thread of alarm was beginning to work its way into his chest. "Some of you," Adelheid continued, and now her eyes moved across the chamber, slow and deliberate, "will be angry. Some of you will believe I have made a mistake, or lost my wits, or been deceived. Some of you have spent years arranging your affairs around the certainty that the regency would fall to a particular hand, and you will feel robbed. I understand this. I have thought about it more than any of you can know. And I have decided that I would rather leave this kingdom to someone who will govern it well and be hated for a season, than to someone who will govern it comfortably and let it rot. So." She lifted her head, and her voice rang out across the silent chamber. "Mistress Catherine Merrow, come forward." For one full second, nothing happened. The name meant nothing to most of the room. It landed in the great chamber like a stone dropped into deep water, and the ripple of it spread outward in a rising tide of confusion. Merrow. Who was Merrow? Heads turned, searching, and found nothing, because they were all looking at the front of the room, among the great and the titled, and the name did not belong to anyone there. Catherine Merrow stood frozen at the back by the servants' door, and the whole world had narrowed to a single high ringing note, and she could not move, could not breathe, could not make her mind accept the thing her ears had just heard. "Mistress Merrow," said Adelheid again, and her old eyes found Catherine's across the entire length of the chamber, steady and certain and utterly without apology. "I know you are there. Come forward. It is time." And the whole chamber turned. 100 of the most powerful people in Verinhold turned in their seats and looked at the back of the room, and saw a plain young woman in a plain gray dress standing alone by the servants' door, white-faced, her hands pressed flat against her sides, and they understood all at once and together that this nobody, this clerk, this provincial road engineer's daughter, was the person the regent had chosen to rule them. The silence that followed was the worst thing Catherine had ever heard. She made herself walk. She did not know how. Every step down the long aisle between the great lords was the longest walk of her life, through a gauntlet of faces that ranged from open astonishment to naked contempt, and she kept her eyes on the old woman at the front of the room because the old woman's eyes were the only thing in the entire chamber that was not asking her who she thought she was. She walked past Rennick there, and she saw his face, and she would remember it for the rest of her life. The total, blank, incomprehending shock of a man watching everything he had ever counted on being handed to a stranger, followed in the space of a single breath by something colder and far more dangerous as the shock hardened into fury. She reached the front. She stopped before the regent. She did not know what to do, so she did the only thing that felt true, which was to look the old woman in the eye and speak plainly, as she had always spoken to her. "Highness," she said low so that only Adelheid could hear, "I don't understand. I'm nobody. I'm a clerk. These people will never—" "I know exactly what you are," Adelheid said just as low. "I have known for 11 years. It is considerably more than you think. Now stand up straight and turn around and look at them, because from this moment until the day you die they will be watching you, and the first thing they must see is that you do not flinch." Catherine looked at her for one more heartbeat. Then she straightened her back and she turned, and she faced the chamber full of powerful people who despised her, and she did not flinch. It was Rennick who broke the silence, of course. He rose from his seat slowly, and when he spoke his voice was smooth and warm and reasonable, and it carried to every corner of the room, and it was the most dangerous sound Catherine had ever heard because there was no anger in it at all. "Aunt," he said gently, "beloved Highness, we are all of us grieved beyond words to hear of your illness, and no one in this room doubts your love for Verinhold or your right to name whom you please." He spread his hands, the picture of reason, of reluctance, of a man forced by love to speak an unwelcome truth. "But you are unwell. You have told us so yourself. And I think with the greatest tenderness that a great and dying heart may sometimes be moved by pity for the humble and may mistake that pity for judgment. This young woman may be everything you say. I am sure she is kind. I am sure she is diligent. But she has no name, no training, no experience of rule, no standing among the men who must be governed. To set such a burden on such shoulders is not a kindness to her. It is a cruelty. And to set it on the kingdom," he let his voice drop, sorrowful, grave, "may be a danger we cannot afford. I say this as one who loves you. Reconsider, while there is still time." It was masterful. Catherine understood, standing there, exactly how masterful it was. He had not challenged the regent's right. He had not shown anger. He had wrapped a knife in tenderness and slid it in gently, and he had given every frightened, offended lord in the room a way to oppose the choice while telling themselves they were only being loving and wise. She could see it working. She could see heads beginning slowly to nod. Adelheid opened her mouth to answer, and Catherine saw the old woman sway, saw the effort of the last hour finally catch her, saw her reach for the table and this time miss, and understood in a flash of pure cold clarity that if she waited for the regent to defend her, she would be defended by a dying woman's failing strength. And the lords would see that weakness, and it would become, in their minds, the weakness of the choice itself. So Catherine did not wait. "He's right," she said. The words fell into the chamber and stopped everything. Adelheid's head turned sharply. Rennick's careful expression flickered with the first real uncertainty he'd shown. Catherine stepped forward, and she pitched her voice not to plead but simply to be heard, the flat, clear voice of a woman reporting a fact. "Lord Rennick is right that I have no name," she said. "He's right that I have no title and no training in the things you were all raised to. I won't stand here and pretend otherwise, because you'd know I was lying and you'd be right to. I'm a clerk. My father built roads. I came to this palace at 19, and I have spent 11 years doing work that most of you have never had to think about. Because the work I do is the work that keeps people in the mountain villages alive through the winter, and those people have never once been important enough for this room to notice." She let that land. No one spoke. "So yes, he's right about what I lack, but he asked you to think about danger, and I'd ask you to think about it too, only more carefully than he wants you to. 3 winters ago a fever came to the lower town, and the palace locked its gates, and 340 people in the quarantine districts were going to die because no one with a title would sign the order to release the grain. I signed it. I didn't have the authority. I forged the regent's seal to do it, and I'd do it again tomorrow, and when she found out she could have had me flogged and dismissed, and instead she has spent 11 years watching to see whether I'd ever become someone smaller than that. I'm told I didn't. She looked for just a moment at Adelheid and then back at the room. Lord Rennick asks whether I'm a danger to the kingdom. It's a fair question. Here's mine. In 11 years in this palace, how many of you have ever once signed your name to something that would ruin you, in order to save people you would never meet and who could never repay you? Because that, and not the length of your name, is the only training for rule that has ever actually mattered. She knows it. That's why she chose the way she chose. That's why the regency has held for 140 years while kingdoms built on bloodlines tore themselves apart around us. The silence was different now. Not sympathetic, she had not won them. She was nowhere near winning them. But it was the silence of a room that had stopped nodding along, the silence of powerful people who had come expecting to dismiss a frightened girl and had instead been handed something they did not know what to do with. Rennick's jaw had tightened. The warmth had gone out of his face, and what was left underneath it was the thing Catherine had glimpsed when she passed his chair. And she understood that she had just made, in front of the entire kingdom, an enemy who would never now rest until one of them destroyed the other. Adelheid, gripping the table, looked at the young woman she had chosen, and on the old regent's face was an expression that Catherine would spend a long time trying to name, and would eventually settle on as something very close to triumph. "That," said Adelheid to the chamber, her voice thin now but carrying, "is the person I have named. You have heard her. You have taken her measure, the true measure, the one that matters. The ceremony of the naming will be held in 3 days in the old hall before the ancient witnesses as the law requires. Until then this council is ended." She paused, and her eyes swept the room one final time and came to rest for just a moment on her nephew. "Go home. Think carefully. And any man who imagines that my death will unmake what I have done in the light before all of you, think more carefully still." She turned and she walked toward the great doors, and Catherine saw what it cost her, saw that she would not last much longer, and moved without thinking to walk beside her. Not touching, just close. A steady presence at the old woman's side in case the failing strength gave out at last. And the two of them walked out of the silent chamber together, the dying regent and the clerk's daughter she had lifted over the heads of the proud, while behind them 100 powerful people sat in the ruins of everything they had assumed that morning, and began already to choose their sides. In the corridor, out of sight of the chamber, Adelheid finally let herself lean against the cold stone wall and closed her eyes and breathed. "You didn't wait for me to defend you," she said when she could speak. "You were about to fall," said Catherine. "They'd have seen it. I couldn't let the first thing they learned about your choice be that you were too weak to make it, so I made them look at me instead." The old woman opened her eyes and looked at her, and gave a short, rasping laugh that turned halfway into a cough. 11 years, she said, and you still find new ways to prove me right. Listen to me, girl. In 3 days I will make you regent, and then, very soon after, I will die, and you will be alone in a palace full of people who want you gone, with my nephew at the center of them. And Rennick will not challenge you honestly because he never does anything honestly. He will smile and he will wait, and he will look for the moment when your strength or your friends or your nerve is weakest, and then he will move. You have 3 days to prepare for a fight that will last years. Do not waste them grieving me. I have had a long life and a good one, and I am not afraid. Spend the days I have left learning everything I know, because once I am gone there will be no one left to teach you, and a great many people working to make sure you fail." Catherine looked at the old woman leaning against the stone, the fierce dying regent who had watched her for 11 years and told no one, who had chosen her over blood and power and comfort, who was spending the last strength of her life trying to give a clerk's daughter a fighting chance against the storm to come. "Then we shouldn't stand here," Catherine said quietly. "Teach me, starting now." Adelheid smiled, a real smile, worn and tired and satisfied, and let the young woman take her arm, and the two of them went slowly down the cold corridor together, toward the 3 days that were all the time they had left, while outside the tall windows the snow came down and down over the kingdom that did not yet know what it had just been given. The old woman had 3 days left to teach a clerk's daughter how to hold a kingdom, and she did not waste a single hour of them. They began that same night in the regent's private study, with the snow ticking against the tall dark windows and a single lamp burning between them. Adelheid sat wrapped in furs with the brown bottle no longer hidden, but standing openly at her elbow now, and she talked, and Catherine listened, and the old woman poured 37 years of ruling into the young woman across the table with the desperate economy of someone who has run out of time to be anything but honest. She did not teach etiquette or precedence, or which lord must be seated above which other lord at a feast. She had contempt for all of that. She taught the things that could not be learned from books. Power, she said that first night, is not the ability to make people do what you want. Any fool with soldiers can force a man's body. Power is that people do what you want when you are not there, when you cannot punish them, when it would be easier and safer for them to do otherwise. And there is only one way in the world to build that kind of power, and it is slow, and it is this. You must be, over and over for years, the person who does the right thing when it costs you. That is all. There is no trick. Rennick has never understood it. He believes power is charm and debts and marriages, and so his power is a house of glass, and the first hard wind will shatter it. Yours will be built of stone, because you have already spent 11 years laying the foundation without knowing it. Do not ever, once you are regent, be tempted to rule his way. The moment you buy a man's loyalty, you have taught him that loyalty is for sale and someone will always outbid you. Earn it instead. It is harder and it is slower, and it is the only kind that holds. She taught her the kingdom itself, not the map of it which Catherine knew, but the hidden map underneath, the debts and grudges and old wounds and quiet decencies of the great families, who could be trusted and who could not, and, most importantly, who was neither but might be one. She told her which of the lords who had sneered at her in the council were proud but honest men who would come around once they saw her govern, and which were Rennick's creatures who never would. She told her the name of the one mountain baron, a hard, silent old man named Ostrek, who commanded the loyalty of the northern holdings and owed Rennick nothing and had watched the whole council in silence, and she said, "Win Ostrek and you cut Rennick's strength in half. He does not care for charm. He cares whether a thing is true. Speak to him the way you speak to me, and do not flatter him, and you may have a chance." On the second day, Adelheid was weaker and could not rise from her chair, and so she taught from the chair. She had the commander of the palace guard brought in, a scarred, plain-spoken woman named Havard who had served the regency for 30 years, and she made Havard swear her oath to Catherine there in the study, and she watched the two women take each other's measure, and when Havard had gone she said, "That one is yours now, and she does not give her oath twice. The guard will hold for you. That matters more than you yet understand, because the ceremony in the old hall is the moment of greatest danger, and if Rennick means to do something openly, it will be there, and Havard's people are the only thing standing between you and a knife in a crowd." "You think he'd go that far?" Catherine said. It was not quite a question. "I think," said Adelheid slowly, "that my nephew has spent 44 years believing the regency was his, and I have just taken it from him in front of the entire kingdom, and there is nothing on this earth more dangerous than a proud man who has been humiliated in public and believes himself robbed of what he is owed. I do not think he will send an assassin. That is not his way. He is too careful and too fond of his own hands being clean, but I think he will do something at the ceremony. Some challenge, some claim, some move to make the nomming seem unlawful or forced or the raving of a dying woman, so that when I am gone he can say the true succession was never completed and put himself forward as the rightful heir. Be ready for it. Do not be surprised by it. And when it comes, and it will come at the worst possible moment in front of everyone, designed to shake you, do the one thing he will never expect." "Which is?" "Tell the truth," said the old regent, plainly, without fear. He builds everything out of appearances, and the truth, spoken without flinching, is the one weapon he has no defense against because he has spent his whole life avoiding it. You did it in the council. You did it to me 11 years ago in this room. It is the thing you are best at in all the world, and it is the thing he is worst at, and that is why you will win. Now, there is one more thing I must teach you, and it is the hardest, and I have saved it for last." She reached into the drawer of the writing desk slowly, her hand shaking badly now, and drew out the sealed letter Catherine had not known existed, and laid it on the table between them. "When I am dead," Adelheid said, "and you are alone and everything is going wrong and you are certain you have failed and that I chose wrong and that you should never have let me do this to you, and that day will come, girl, I promise you it will come, you will open this. Not before. On your worst day. Give me your word." Catherine looked at the letter and at the old woman's shaking hand upon it, and something in her chest closed like a fist. "You could just tell me now," she said, and her voice was not quite steady. "No," said Adelheid gently. "Now you would only hear it. On that day you will need it. Give me your word." "You have it," Catherine said. The old woman nodded and drew her hand back, and for a moment the fierce mask slipped entirely, and what was underneath was very old and very tired, and Catherine saw for the first time, a little afraid, not of dying, but of leaving, of the vast and undone work she would not be there to finish, of the young woman she was about to abandon to the storm. Catherine did the only thing she could think to do. She reached across the table and took the old woman's trembling hand in both of hers, and held it, and neither of them said anything at all, and the snow ticked against the windows, and the lamp burned low, and the second of their 3 days ended in silence. The morning of the naming, Adelheid could not walk. They carried her to the old hall in a chair, wrapped in the black and gold, the chain of office about her neck, and though her body had failed her at last her eyes were clear and fierce and entirely present. And when she looked at Catherine, dressed, now not in the plain gray, but in the deep robes of the regency to be, which fit her as though they had been waiting for her, she gave a single small nod that said more than any words could have. The old hall was the most ancient room in Verinhold, older than the palace built around it, a long stone chamber with a vaulted roof lost in shadow, and along its walls, the carved stone likenesses of every regent who had ruled since the founding war, the ancient witnesses, the law called them, the silent stone company of the dead before whom every naming had to be completed to be lawful. The great lords filled the hall. Ostrek the mountain baron stood apart and silent among the northern men. Havard's guards stood at the walls and the doors, watchful, their hands never far from their blades. And Rennick stood near the front in deep blue and silver, calm, composed, patient, and Catherine, who had learned to read him now, saw that he was waiting for his moment exactly as Adelheid had said he would. The keeper of the old ceremonies began the rite. It was very old and very simple. There were words to be said, and an oath to be sworn upon the stone hands of the ancient witnesses, and then the regent would place her own ring upon the successor's finger, and it would be done and lawful and beyond any undoing. The keeper spoke the ancient words. Catherine answered them, her voice steady in the great stone silence. Adelheid, from her chair, spoke the regent's part, thin but clear. And it came to the moment of the oath, the moment when Catherine knelt before the carved stone witnesses and laid her hand upon the cold stone, and Rennick chose exactly then, exactly as he had been going to all along, to speak. "Stop!" His voice rang out through the hall, grave and sorrowful and reasonable. "In the name of the law itself, stop, before this kingdom does a thing it cannot undo." The keeper faltered. Every head turned. Rennick stepped forward into the space before the ancient witnesses, and he did not look at Catherine at all. He turned to the assembled lords, to the whole kingdom gathered to watch, and he spread his hands, and he began, smoothly, to do the thing Adelheid had known he would do. "You all saw the council," he said. "You saw a dying woman whom we all love, moved by the illness that is taking her to lift a kind and humble servant far above her station. I said then that I feared it was pity mistaken for judgment, and I was gentle because I hoped she would reconsider. She has not. And now we stand at the very edge of making it law, irrevocable law, sworn before the witnesses of the dead. And I ask you, all of you, in the name of everything we owe this kingdom, can a naming be lawful when the regent who makes it is not in her right strength, when she must be carried to the hall, when the choice defies every custom of 140 years? I do not question her love. I question whether a mind so near its end can bear the weight of so grave a choice. And I say with sorrow, with love, that this naming cannot stand, and that when our beloved regent has gone to her rest, this kingdom will need a true and rightful hand, a hand that knows how to hold it, and that hand. He did not say it, he was far too careful to say it. He only let it hang there, let every eye turn to him, let the shape of the unspoken word fill the silence. That hand must be chosen lawfully, by a council in full strength, and not decided here today in the shadow of a deathbed. It was, Catherine thought, still kneeling with her hand on the cold stone, very nearly perfect. He had not challenged the regent. He had not named himself. He had simply poured doubt into the most solemn moment of the rite, doubt about Adelheid's mind, doubt about the law itself, and he had offered every frightened lord a lawful-sounding reason to undo the whole thing and start again in a council where his charm and his debts and his web of favors would decide the outcome. She could feel it working. She could feel the doubt spreading through the hall like cold water, and she understood that this was the moment, the one Adelheid had spent the last of her strength preparing her for, and that everything now depended on what she did in the next few breaths. She did not rise in anger. She did not appeal to the law or to custom or to Adelheid, whose strength was visibly failing in the chair. She took her hand from the stone, and she stood slowly, and she turned to face the hall. And she spoke plainly, in the flat, clear voice of a woman reporting a fact. "Lord Rennick asks whether the regent is in her right mind," she said. "It's a fair question, and I won't dodge it because dodging it is what he's counting on. So let's answer it, not with feeling, with a test any of you can judge for yourselves." She turned to Adelheid in her chair. "Highness, 3 winters ago, when the fever came to the lower town and the gates were locked, how many people were in the quarantine districts?" The old woman's clear eyes met hers. 341, said Adelheid without hesitation. "You always say 340. You forget the midwife's newborn. It came the same night." A sound moved through the hall. "The Baron of the Northern Holdings," Catherine went on, not looking away from the regent. "The man standing silent among the northern men. What is the one thing you told me about him 2 nights ago?" "That Ostrek does not care for charm," said Adelheid, her voice thin but perfectly steady, perfectly clear. "That he cares only whether a thing is true, and that if you flattered him you would lose him in a breath." Her old mouth curved very slightly. "I also told you he owes my nephew nothing, and has been standing there this whole while, watching Rennick lie and making up his own mind." Every eye in the hall went to the mountain baron. Ostrek, hard and silent and old as the stone witnesses on the walls, looked back at them, and then he looked at Rennick for a long, cold moment, and then he looked at Catherine, and he said in a voice like rocks grinding the first words he had spoken in the whole affair. "The old woman's mind is clearer than her nephew's tongue. I have heard enough smooth men to know the sound. I have not heard enough true ones." He paused. "The girl speaks true. I have watched her 3 days, and I have watched him 40 years. I know which one I would trust with the North." And he inclined his head once to Catherine, not to the regent, to Catherine. And the sound that went through the hall this time was something else entirely, because Ostrek held the loyalty of the Northern Holdings, and Ostrek had just chosen, and every lord in the room had felt the ground move. Rennick's face had gone white. "This proves nothing," he said, and for the first time there was something other than smoothness in his voice, a thin edge of the fury underneath. "A memory for numbers, a hard old man's whim." "It proves," said Catherine, and now she did turn to him, and she did not raise her voice because she did not need to, "that everything you said about her failing mind was untrue, and you knew it was untrue when you said it, and you said it anyway because you would rather see this kingdom thrown into doubt over your aunt's deathbed than see it pass to someone who isn't you. You didn't come here today grieving her. You came here to use her dying to take a thing she chose not to give you. She told me you would." 2 nights ago, in her study, in her right and clear mind, She told me exactly what you would do and exactly why, and she was right in every particular, and the only thing she got wrong was that she thought you'd be more careful about it. She let that land in the silent hall. I'm a clerk's daughter. I have no name and no title, and I never once sought this, and I stood in the council 3 days ago and told you all plainly everything I lack, because I'd rather you know the truth of me than a flattering lie. He has stood in front of you twice now, in the two gravest moments this kingdom has faced in a generation, and both times he has offered you something that sounded like love and was in fact only ambition wearing love's coat. That is the whole difference between us. That is the only thing the Regent was ever measuring, and it is the only thing that has ever kept this kingdom whole. You want a council in full strength to choose, so do I let it choose now. Let every lord in this hall look at the two of us, and at what we have each just done, and decide which hand they would trust with the north, and the mountain villages, and the newborn the midwife carried through the fever, and everything else in this kingdom that has never been important enough for men like you to remember exists. The hall was utterly silent. And then slowly it began to move, not with words but with bodies. Ostrek had already chosen. Now the northern men moved to stand with him. Then one of the proud, honest lords Adelheid had named, a man who had sneered at Catherine in the council, rose and crossed the floor and stood with the north, his face hard and thoughtful. Then another. Then Havard's guards, without being told, shifted their stance in a way that was not quite a threat and was not quite not one, and the message of it was unmistakable. The guard had chosen too. And Rennick stood alone in the space before the ancient witnesses, and watched the room he had counted on for 40 years choose the clerk's daughter in front of his eyes, one lord at a time, in a silence more damning than any shout, until at last he understood that it was over, that he had made his move at the worst possible moment exactly as she had known he would, and that the truth, spoken without fear, had done to his house of glass exactly what his aunt had promised it would. He did not rage. He was too careful even now. He straightened his blue and silver, and he composed his white face back into something like dignity, and he bowed to the Regent stiffly and not at all to Catherine, and he turned and walked out of the old hall through the great doors, and the lords he had counted as his own did not follow him, and the doors closed behind him, and it was, though the years of watching him would not be in that moment finished. The keeper of the old ceremonies cleared his throat into the silence and said, a little unsteadily, "Shall we complete the rite?" Catherine knelt again before the ancient witnesses, and laid her hand upon the cold stone, and swore the old oath in a clear and steady voice, before the stone company of every regent who had ruled since the founding war. And then Adelheid, who could no longer rise from her chair, beckoned her close, and Catherine came and knelt beside her instead. And the old woman took the heavy ring from her own finger with shaking hands and pressed it onto Catherine's, and held the young woman's hand in both of hers for a long moment, and looked at her with those clear, fierce eyes that had watched her for 11 years and told no one. "It is done," Adelheid said softly so that only Catherine could hear, lawfully, in the light, before them all and before the witnesses of the dead. He cannot undo it now. No one can. She drew a breath that rattled in her chest. You will have years of him yet. He will smile and wait and try again in 100 quieter ways, and you will have to be better than him every single day for the rest of your life. And some days you will be tired past bearing, and you will want to buy an easy peace, and you must not. Promise me you will not." "I promise," said Catherine. "Good." The old woman's grip loosened just slightly. "Then I have done the one thing that mattered. 37 years, and in the end it comes down to this, that I found you that bad winter and I was watching and I did not look away." Her eyes moved past Catherine up to the shadowed vault where the carved witnesses stood, and something in her face eased. "Go and rule them well, girl. Build in stone, and on your worst day." "The letter," Catherine said, her throat tight. "I remember, not before." "Not before," Adelheid agreed, and smiled and closed her eyes, and let the young woman she had chosen hold her hand in the old stone hall while the newly sworn regent of Verinhold knelt beside her, unwilling to let go. Adelheid died 4 days later, quietly in the night in her own bed, with Catherine sitting beside her. The years that followed were every bit as hard as the old woman had promised. Rennick did not give up. He smiled and he waited, and he tried again in 100 quieter ways, exactly as she had said he would, and Catherine had to be better than him every single day, and some days she was tired past bearing. The great lords tested her endlessly in that first year, probing for weakness, waiting for the clerk's daughter to stumble. She did not give them what they wanted. She governed the way Adelheid had taught her, slowly, in stone, doing the right thing when it cost her, over and over, until the doing of it became the thing the kingdom expected and then the thing it depended on. She built the bridge where the child had drowned, and then the next one and the one after that. She won Ostrek's trust fully, and then his friendship. She made Havard's guard love her. She was, year by patient year, exactly the person Adelheid had spent 11 years watching to be sure she was. And the kingdom came, slowly, to see it, until there was hardly a soul left in Verinhold who remembered there had ever been doubt. She opened the letter once, about a year in, on a night when everything had gone wrong at once, and she sat alone in the study that had been Adelheid's and was certain, exactly as the old woman had foretold, that she had failed, that the choice had been a mistake, that she should never have let it be done to her. She broke the seal with shaking hands and read it in the low lamplight, and what it said she never told anyone, and never needed to read again, because by the time she had finished it she was no longer certain she had failed. She folded it and put it away and went back to work. She kept the ring on her finger for the rest of her life. And when at last her own winter came, many years later, an old woman herself now, straight-backed and clear-eyed and fierce, she did what had been done for her. She looked out across the kingdom she had built in stone, and she found the most ordinary and overlooked and quietly decent person in it, someone no one else had thought to notice, and she began, patiently and without telling a soul, to watch. Because that was the thing Adelheid had truly given her in the end. Not a crown, not a kingdom, but the knowing of where to look for the next one, and the courage, when she found them, not to look away.